Welcome to Producing Confidence, a Danos family of companies podcast. Whether it's breaking news from the field, insights on innovation, or behind-the-scenes stories, we're excited to keep you connected and informed. Tune in and join us as we continue producing confidence every step of the way.
Hello and welcome. Today we're talking about something that doesn't always get the spotlight, but plays a critical role in keeping operations running safely and efficiently: fabric maintenance. I'm your host, Melanie Toups, and today I'm joined by Clay Carter and Matthew Ferguson from Performance Energy Services, operating as part of the Danos family of companies, providing specialized construction, fabrication, and project services to the energy industry. Clay is our General Manager of Specialty Craft Services, and Matt is a Project Manager for our Coatings Division. They're going to walk us through what this work really looks like from strategy to the field and why it matters to the industry. Clay and Matt, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, happy to be here.
So, Clay, let's start simple. For someone that's not in the industry, what is fabric maintenance?
Fabric maintenance is the upkeep of the facilities that we work on. It's the materials, it's the steels, it's the fireproofing, high heat coatings, specialty coatings, epoxies. It's all stuff to maintain the structural integrity of the asset.
Okay. Matt, so bring that to the field to us and walk us through what the work involves. Like, what are your teams doing day to day?
I'll start from the beginning of the process. So typically we would, if it's a new platform, a new area, we would begin to surface prep, and that would involve blasting abrasive, and that's how we would get the surface profile. And then we would work from our customers' specs and then move on to the paint side, the fabric maintenance side. So then we would typically, if we're offshore, we would administer a 3-coat system, a primer, an intermediate, and then the top coat, which is typically a high gloss finish. So from the field aspect, it's quite a straightforward process, but there's a lot of intricacies that come along the way. Hence why it's developed from paint to coatings, and now it's the fabric maintenance. Like Clay said, there's so many aspects and so much evolution that's occurred in the last few years, or more than a few years, that have evolved this process.
Is this something that is done on land or offshore or both?
Both. It's in all markets. And
what kind of environments is involved whenever you're doing your team's doing this type of work?
So offshore environment, I mean, it's typically a high salt water based, so there's a lot of salt in the air, so it's quite technical. We really need to get the best environmental conditions in order to administer the work. On land, it's a little easier, typically in the downstream market, depending on where we're working, if it could be in a plant or it could be a pipeline midstream facility. The environments change, but it's typically a little easier to work on land than it is offshore. But of course, for both of them, it's usually always a weather aspect of when we can paint and how we can administer the job.
So Clay, let's zoom out a little bit. Why is this work becoming a bigger priority for customers right now?
If you look at how customers are spending money, if you allow that corrosion to continue to develop and get bigger and bigger, it becomes a construction problem. The longer you have an asset that is deteriorating from rust, if you're not arresting that corrosion and putting new paint in there that's going to protective coatings on the steel, then eventually down the line it becomes a construction project. So there's a lot of focus on taking that money that may have been used for construction later down the road and putting it forward to be able to keep the cost of maintenance lower.
What are you hearing from customers? Why is fabric maintenance getting more attention in today's environment?
It's very customer specific in who's spending the money on the front end. A lot of people, the cost of borrowing money is very expensive. And so some people will wait until it's it's a government-regulated project. Bessie will sometimes inform customers they have to paint something. You have instances with other customers that are forward-thinking on the proactive side that are saying, we don't want to make this a construction problem later. Let's keep this paint crew on the asset and let's take care of the fabric maintenance now so that we're not dealing with it later.
Okay. And what happens when it gets delayed or overlooked? You mentioned the construction implications. Like, talk a little bit more about that.
We have a customer we work for right now that has been very high op tempo, a lot of drilling, a lot of POB space. And POB is how many people you're allowed to have on the asset due to either lifeboat positions or just bunk space in general. And when you have that high op tempo, your focus is oil production. And coatings, fabric maintenance doesn't play a very big piece of production in itself. So you may have pushed off the coatings for however long, and that becomes a construction project now. And this particular customer that's been at a high op tempo is spending a lot more money than they would have had they taken care of it 5 years ago.
Matt, you probably see the impact of this firsthand in the field. What happens when maintenance hasn't been kept up?
We usually uncover a lot more damage to the pipelines or the structures that we're working on. Typically, pinholes can occur, which can be a major issue out in the field. And then it's typically strenuous work in terms of a lot more blasting and surface preparation, and it takes a lot more materials to get the job done. Whereas if it was taken care of previously and kind of kept ahead, we could have saved money for the customer by not putting as much work into it as is needed. Mm-hmm. But if it's left for too long, and we uncover a lot of repairs that could get kicked onto construction, that becomes a big issue.
What are some of the common issues that y'all run into when you're stepping on site, when somebody's behind on maintenance?
Once we start blasting, we uncover issues behind the rust. They can act as a barrier, a visual barrier, and we can't see them until we start blasting. Then we see pinholes and leaks come through. It's not too often that happens, but it does something that occurs. And we're not necessarily blasting on very high pressure pipe typically when we're working on these assets. The customer will kind of shut it down or reduce the pressure that's going through in order for us to work on. So we take all the safety precautions very seriously out there, especially when we're working on these Category 4 areas.
Yeah, I was about to ask that. It seems like there's some safety concerns if you go in thinking one thing and then you uncover that when you're actually on site, it looks like a totally different story.
Mm-hmm. Well, typically we do a thorough walkthrough prior to every job, and there's a lot of communication between us and the customer. So we're prepared before we start day one of work.
Yeah, so the construction corrosion that you're talking about, that could turn into a fatality potentially. So,
for example, I was with a customer and we were kind of bouncing around their unmanned assets in the Gulf last year. As we were evaluating the pipelines and what work needed to be had, and then you kind of look down and then the stairway is completely broken from the previous storm coming through. So quickly the corrosion maintenance project turns into a mass construction project.
Wow.
So, and the idea is that these unmanned platforms are typically, they're well kept to a certain extent, and the pipelines are well kept, but the structures sometimes kind of get left behind. And once a storm comes through or just, it hasn't been taken care of correctly, that's when the real safety issues come in. So like Clay said previously, some of these corrosion maintenance projects turn into construction projects real quick. But our job in fabric maintenance is to kind of stop that from occurring and get there ahead of the game.
All right, Clay, from a planning standpoint, what separates reactive work from a well-run fabric maintenance program?
You use the key word in there, reactive. When you're on the proactive side, you have a good inspection program. you have a good team of individuals who are assessing the platform on a regular basis. Maybe that's quarterly, maybe that's you have somebody that's stationed there all the time that's looking at and writing up work and building out scopes. Now, from our perspective, we typically receive the scope, build the plan, and then go to work on those particular scopes. But the companies that are on the proactive side of it have somebody that's out there assessing the corrosion and writing up the scopes.
Okay. And then for the reactive side, like, what does that look like? I know that's not ideal, but how does that work? What happens?
On the reactive side, probably the easiest form is Bessie tells you have to paint something. They came to your asset and they said, this needs some serious work. We've moved pretty far away from that with most of the customers we deal with. But on the reactive side, you're just trying to keep your head above water for the most part.
Mm-hmm. So Matt, back to you. For years, I have heard rave reviews about our coatings crews. From your perspective, how can you tell when a project is set up well?
Well, I think it starts with the pre-planning of the project. It's communicating with the customer. It's putting myself and the superintendent's eyes on the project, developing a plan with the customer. I think that's essential before we start any kind of production. And then once we're on site, it's daily QC reports. It is good judgment in terms of when to execute, and it's good communication with the customer so we can create the best environment in order to create the best work available. And it's also good communication with our vendors too, especially our paint vendors, because it's not just the same paint we use for each substrate within the same facility or on the same asset. Factors such as heat of the pipe will affect what kind of paint we use. So it's all getting those factors taken care of even before we start day one on the work site.
You mentioned QC reports. So how do you make sure that quality stays consistent across all your crews?
Well, we have multiple ways of testing quality within fabric maintenance. It's testing the moisture in the atmosphere. It's testing, once we've blasted, have we got the correct peaks and valleys on the substrate in order to begin the painting process. And then it's with the painting process, it's the wet film thickness of when the paint still hasn't cured. And then it's the dry film thickness, which is most important once it's cured, make sure we've got the correct millage in order to protect the substrate.
What would you say is some of the biggest challenges y'all have on active sites? I know you mentioned unmanned locations. What are some of the challenges on these active sites? I
think the main challenge we have is weather, especially south in the Gulf and in the southern Gulf states. Weather's pretty unpredictable a lot of the year. With regards to manned assets or manned facilities, it's SIMOPS typically comes up. It's POB space on assets. Can we get the correct number of personnel in order to execute the job?
And with all that going on, you have different crews, different teams, different projects going on all at the same time. Safety is always front and center. I know that. So what are some of the biggest safety considerations in the coatings work?
You start with the last line of defense, which is the PPE side. We make sure that our guys are equipped accordingly with the specific PPEs that they need. And then it's equipment management. Make sure equipment's operating properly and correctly and all the safety mitigations are in place on each piece of equipment. And then it's execution of work, making sure that our guys are working in a safe manner before their quality. We want safety, that's first, and then quality a close second.
Productivity too.
Productivity as well.
Yeah, so that's like my next question. How do you balance getting it done right and getting it done safely?
I don't think it's a question of getting the balance. It's we need to get this done safely and we need to get this done correct. There's no balance in there. This is the way we do things, is safely and high quality.
So what can go wrong if it's not handled the right way?
With safety, I think if something's not handled the right way, in extreme cases, someone can get hurt. That is foremost in front of what we don't want to happen. And with regards to quality, there's many factors that could affect the quality. It could be the weather. It could be the surface preparation. It could be the mixing of the paint was slightly off. So if that does occur, especially when it comes to issues on the substrate or issues with the coatings, then we've got to kind of step back, reevaluate, and kind of do a small investigation into why it went wrong and how we can correct this in the future and make sure that this issue doesn't arise again.
So Clay, how do you think about risk and responsibility when you're leading this type of work with customers?
So this is a very risky environment that we work in. A lot of high pressure stuff, falls, trips, things can happen. And so we need to give our personnel in the field the tools they need to safely perform this work. Matt talked about it, focusing on PPE, focusing on procedures, focusing on taking the time to do it right. And so we empower our people to perform safely. We give them stop work responsibility. Anybody on the crew can stop the job if they see something unsafe, if their communications aren't up. We hired a helper a few years ago, never been offshore, but was a new set of eyes, didn't understand what his task was and used his stop work authority. The team regathered, they talked about the situation. Once he felt comfortable, they went back to work. And our customer in that case backed us up as well. So we have good customers, we have good people that we hire, and we give them the tools to perform work safely.
So Clay, in your opinion, what sets PES fabric maintenance apart from others doing the exact same work?
At Performance, we truly care about our people. And when you care for your people and they feel that care, the customer feels that care. Performance, the culture of caring that we've developed starts with our management staff. They truly care about the people that are on their projects. They truly care about providing safe operations, being able to provide for their families and take that home to their loved ones.
It is special. So Matt, you mentioned different paint or different products being used for different substrates. I'm sorry if I get that terminology wrong, but do different customers request different types of paint for projects?
So each customer has a specs. So typically they vet out paint vendors and they get with them and they figure out what's their best paint from that vendor. Some customers have just one vendor that they like to use. Others have 3 or 4. Typically it's to the customer's discretion of what one we use, or sometimes it can be up to us. So it's something that's already put in place before we go out there, and it's something between the customer and their kind of, I guess, their chemistry departments and how they figure out what's the best paint to use in certain situations.
Mm-hmm. What about the technology? I know that there's different approaches to painting. Talk a little bit more about that.
There's multiple different ways to prepare the surface. The first thing you have to do is get the soluble salts down, so you pressure wash. From there, you can use ultra high pressure water at 40,000 psi to remove the corrosion in paint. You can use sand. There's different types of media when we talk about abrasives. There's sand, there's garnet, there's processes like copper and nickel. There's so many different types of abrasives. Then you can introduce water into the abrasives. That's called slurry blast. Right now we're part of a robotics consortium that's looking at how do we bring robotics to the surface prep industry. And so technology is advancing at a very high pace right now in our industry, and it's pretty cool to be a part of.
I mean, I'm really impressed with the coatings group, and whenever we have questions from customers asking us what new technology we have, and then I learn about the robotics that's happening in this, the group that we're in, or this consortium that we're in. It's very impressive to know that about Performance. Like that's a special sauce that I really think is cool. So Matt, what makes up a strong fabric maintenance crew?
Well, I think it's the crew needs to have good communication within themselves and have a good working relationship with each other. So you kind of break down the crew. You'll have your superintendent, who's kind of the oversees the project on the ground, and he's the link to me and to the customer in some instances. And then you have your blaster painters, which carry out the bulk of the heavy lifting of the work, and then you have your helpers who typically kind of do the nitty-gritty work, which is, typically they're guys who are young, who are looking to get into the industry and get into, blasting and painting, and they do things such as like mixing paint or moving sand. But all of those guys need to be working together and being good cohorts in order to execute the job itself. So it starts with, pre-work meetings every day, JSAs every day, working through things together, understanding the scope of work in its entirety and for the day ahead itself, and understanding that the work, though it needs to be quality, that safety is the most important thing when they're working together.
And what kind of mindset or work ethic stands out in a good crew?
The attitude, the willingness and care they put into their work really stands out. You can tell that from a good crew. And it's not just collectively, it's individual too. It can be from the superintendent putting in good QC reports at the end of the evening to the helper, making sure all the paint's mixed correctly.
Matt, what's a project or experience that made you especially proud of the teams that you work with?
So I look back to Danos's and Performance's purpose. So on a project whilst the crew was working in Florida, one of the team members unfortunately had a tragedy at home. So I go back to care for people and how that's installed in the culture of this company. And we managed to get him home as quick as possible. We introduced him to Danos Cares program, and that really kind of sat well with me of how we take care of our employees through tragedy, and we're always there as a leaning post for them if something happens. And that makes me feel extremely comfortable and very proud to be part of this company.
Yeah, that's definitely a special thing that happens here with the Danos Cares program, like you said. All right, so this question is for both of you. We'll start with Clay. For someone inside of Danos or PES who's listening, what opportunities are there in fabric maintenance?
If you look at the team that I have around me, Matt was in safety, PhD from across the pond. Kim Dang was in sales at a sand distributor. Carl comes from the customer. Therese, she started off as a janitor at this company. The possibilities are limitless for people.
That's so true. Yeah, the coatings team that we have here is an unbelievable mix of how we develop people here. It's truly cool to see it in action. What about you, Matt?
Speaking for myself, I had no knowledge of fabric maintenance prior to starting to work in this department. I came from safety where we were quite hands-on and across all service lines. So there's opportunities in fabric maintenance no matter what level of your knowledge or your skill or your background, whether or not it's, blasting and painting or it's, more administrative work. I think it's a great service line to be involved with if you're willing to learn and willing to put in the effort to understand the intricacies.
What are some things that if someone's interested in joining the fabric maintenance group or if they want to get involved in coding, a career in coatings, what is something that they should develop if they want to succeed in this space?
Well, I think they need to get boots on the ground and go and see the operations in place. And that also involves understanding the equipment too, spending time in our logistics yard in Amelia and understanding how the equipment works and why we use certain equipment for certain jobs. The large equipment for the larger scale jobs and the smaller for the smaller scale jobs.
So Clay, what do you look for when you're building or leading these teams?
When you're building teams, you want a strong project manager, a strong supervisor, and you start with that. The supervisor can make up. We ask a lot of our supervisors in terms of coaching people and developing them, and so they may not get the best blaster painter, but you look for attitude past that technical skill, because a good attitude, a willingness to learn goes a lot further than any technical skill ever will.
Absolutely. Clay, looking ahead, where do you see fabric maintenance heading over the next few years?
It's traveling at a very fast speed right now in terms of technology. If you look at what AI is doing with chemistry, if you look at what our paint manufacturers are looking into and raw materials that they're using, and if you look at the surface preparation techniques, the robotics consortiums we're a part of, it's a very fast-moving industry, and the technology changes every day.
Yeah, we always hear that just when you have reached the point where you've caught up with technology, you're already behind. So what are some things that we do to stay on top of technology?
We have a very good vendor network. They're helping us drive the future of what they're seeing from their perspectives. We're members of AMPP, the Association for Materials Protection and Performance. We're a part of the robotics consortium, and that's a pretty cool consortium to be a part of. It features former members of NASA. It brings in people from colleges, universities. It brings in the manufacturers of equipment. So we try to stay as in touch with the new technologies that are coming out as possible so that we can provide that service to our customers.
That's impressive work. Clay, what's a tough decision or a moment in this work that shaped how you lead today?
There's a moment from when I first started with the company. Been here about 13 years. Kind of a learning curve getting into this industry. Coming from the Navy, I didn't have much background in it. And so we had a customer that we were working for. We had an issue where personnel were smoking in non-designated smoking areas. And 2 of the times we got caught, they said if there's a third one, strike 3, you're out. And so what we tried to do to curb that was have lock boxes for the supervisor to confiscate everybody's cigarettes in between breaks. And, fast forward a few months, that kind of wore down a little bit. And while they were cleaning up one day in this work area, the supervisor discovered a cigarette that had been smoked in the non-designated smoking area. He could have done anything. He could have thrown it away. He could have put it in his pocket. He could have not informed us. He brought that information back to us. And when he brought it back to us, we knew the right answer was we have to inform the customer. We can't keep this, honesty, truthfulness. That's who we want to be up front with our customers. They were glad that we informed them. They still sent us packing. But, the lesson was learned that, we have values. The best approach is to be honest, open, and upfront with our customers.
Yeah, integrity goes a long way.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. How did you communicate that back to the team?
Crew was sent home. We gathered them in the office before we sent them home. But from the owners of the company all the way down to project management, we commended the person that used integrity and brought that information back to us.
Yeah, what kind of message does that send to them? We serious about this?
It sends a message that we have values and we uphold our values and we live by those values every day.
Clay, Matt, appreciate y'all taking the time to walk us through this today. Fabric maintenance may not always be visible, but it's foundational for doing work the right way, safely, and with long-term performance in mind. Thanks for joining us on Producing Confidence.
My pleasure.
Dang, that was my line, man.
That's it for this episode of Producing Confidence. To learn more about the Danos family of companies, be sure to follow us on social media. Remember, stay safe, stay connected, and keep producing confidence.